On the shoulder of New Mexico State Road 47, just a few miles outside the small town of Belen, a mother found a plastic cassette tape shattered in the dirt. A few paces away lay the plastic casing of a Sony Walkman. It was September 20th, 1988, and 19-year-old Tara Calico was missing. She had left her home at around 9:30 that morning to go on her regular bike ride, a 19-mile loop that took her through the rural landscape surrounding Belen. Her mother, Patty Dole, had expected her to return by noon, but as the hours ticked by with no sign of Tara, a sense of unease began to settle in. The discovery of the shattered cassette tape and the Sony Walkman casing on the side of the road would later become a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation, but at the time, it only added to the mystery of Tara's disappearance. The tape, it turned out, was a mix of music and audio from a popular novel, and while it seemed like an innocuous item, its presence on the ground, broken and abandoned, suggested that something had gone terribly wrong. As investigators began to scour the area, they found more signs of a struggle, including scratches on a nearby fence post and a piece of fabric caught in a barbed wire fence. But that wasn't the strangest part. The fabric, it was later revealed, didn't match anything Tara was wearing that day, leaving detectives to wonder if it belonged to someone else, perhaps even her abductor. This new information raised more questions than answers, and the police were faced with the daunting task of tracking down every possible lead, no matter how small. The investigation was escalating by the minute, with each new discovery adding to the sense of urgency and confusion. The search for Tara expanded to include the surrounding countryside, with volunteers and law enforcement combing the fields and desert landscapes for any sign of the missing woman. But as the days turned into weeks, the trail began to go cold, and the police were left with more questions than answers. One of the most puzzling aspects of the case was the lack of witnesses. Despite the fact that Tara's bike ride took her through a relatively populated area, no one seemed to have seen or heard anything suspicious on the day she disappeared. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the cryptic clues of the shattered cassette tape and the abandoned Sony Walkman. As detectives delved deeper into the case, they began to examine Tara's personal life, looking for any potential motives or conflicts that might have led to her disappearance. But what they found was a young woman with a close-knit family and a tight circle of friends who seemed to have no enemies and no secrets. She was a college student, working part-time and enjoying her independence, with a passion for photography and a love of the outdoors. The more investigators learned about Tara, the more they realized that her disappearance was a complete anomaly, a shocking and inexplicable event that seemed to defy all logic. And yet, despite the lack of clear motives or suspects, the police couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that there was a piece of the puzzle that they hadn't yet found. The investigation continued to unfold, with new leads and new evidence emerging, but each discovery only seemed to raise more questions. The police were faced with a daunting task, trying to piece together the events of that fateful day, and the more they learned, the more they realized that nothing was as it seemed. The shattered cassette tape and the abandoned Sony Walkman had been just the beginning, a tantalizing clue that had set them on a path of discovery, but as they dug deeper, they found themselves entangled in a web of complexity and uncertainty. But that wasn't the only mysterious item found. A Polaroid photo would later be discovered, showing a woman resembling Tara, bound and gagged in the back of a van. This would become one of the most intriguing and disturbing pieces of evidence in the case, and would leave investigators wondering if they were dealing with a crime of opportunity or something far more sinister. That photograph was found on June 15, 1989, nearly 1,500 miles away from Belen, New Mexico, in the parking lot of a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida. A woman coming out of the store noticed a Polaroid image lying face down on the pavement, right where a windowless white Toyota cargo van had been parked moments earlier. When she picked it up, she found herself staring at an image that seemed almost too surreal to be real. Inside what appeared to be the dimly lit interior of a vehicle, a young woman and a young boy were lying on a bed of striped sheets and pillows, their hands bound tightly behind their backs and thick strips of black tape plastered across their mouths. The image immediately triggered an international law enforcement effort, but it was the granular details within the frame that began to narrow the focus. Laying right beside the woman in the photograph was a paperback book, My Sweet Audrina by V. C. Andrews. When investigators questioned Tara's family, her mother, Patty Dole, revealed a staggering detail. My Sweet Audrina was Tara's favorite book, one she carried with her constantly. Patty also pointed to a distinct scar on the leg of the young woman in the photo, running along her calf, a mark identical to one Tara had sustained in a childhood car accident. For Patty Dole, there was no longer any room for doubt. The girl tied up in the back of that white van was her missing daughter. To Patty Dole, the combination of the calf scar, the specific paperback book, and the striking facial features was simply too distinct to be written off as a coincidence. But in the cold, methodical realm of forensic science, certainty is far harder to come by. And what followed was an extraordinary battle of expert opinions. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Technical Services Division subjected the Polaroid to rigorous forensic analysis. Investigators examined the girl's facial geometry, comparing the proportional distances between her eyes, nose, and lips against known photographs of Tara Calico. They scrutinized the light angles, the grain of the film stock, and even the shadow cast by the duct tape across her face. Yet, after weeks of exhaustive testing, the FBI's official position remained frustratingly inconclusive. While federal analysts could neither confirm nor rule out that the young woman bound in the back of the van was Tara, another group of experts reached a strikingly different conclusion. Scotland Yard and the British Forensic Science Service conducted their own independent biometric analysis of the photograph. Their report was unambiguous. They concluded the girl in the picture was indeed Tara Calico. That single, definitive finding from across the Atlantic injected a jolt of urgency into an investigation that was already beginning to fracture under the weight of conflicting evidence. Yet back in the United States, federal officials remained steadfast in their caution. The FBI maintained that the photograph was inconclusive, pointing out that lighting variations, facial positioning, and slight image distortion made a 99% forensic match scientifically impossible with the technology of the late 1980s. Meanwhile, scientists at the Los Alamos National Laboratory conducted their own digital enhancement of the image, analyzing pixel density and facial dimensions, only to arrive at the exact same word: inconclusive. This disagreement among world-class forensic authorities didn't just stall the investigation. It created a profound divide in how the case was pursued. If the photo was authentic, Tara had been transported over 1,400 miles from the high desert of New Mexico to a convenience store parking lot in Port St. Joe, Florida, kept alive in captivity alongside a young boy. But if the photo was a bizarre, cruel hoax or a depiction of two entirely different victims, then investigators were chasing a ghost across the country while the real trail in Valencia County went cold. And then came the detail that made her mother, Patty Dole, absolutely certain. Beside the bound girl in the photograph lay a paperback book, a copy of My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews. Patty informed investigators that this was one of Tara's favorite books, an author she read frequently. To Patty, the presence of that book was far too specific to be a coincidence, but investigators had to ask a darker question. If a stranger had snatched Tara off State Road 47, how could they have known her reading preferences unless she had the book in her possession when she was taken, or her captor was someone from her inner circle who knew her intimately? Yet, just as the Polaroid seemed to anchor the entire narrative to Florida, two more photographs surfaced, casting the entire investigation into even deeper confusion. In late 1989, a second photograph was discovered near a construction site in California. It depicted a girl's face with tape over her mouth, photographed on film that had not been available until long after Tara vanished. The girl shared a striking resemblance to Tara, complete with a visible cowlick on her hair and a scar on her leg matching one Tara had received in a car accident years prior. Before law enforcement could fully analyze the image, a third photo emerged from an Amtrak train station in London, New Mexico, showing a woman loosely bound in gauze, sitting next to a man in dark glasses. Analyses of these subsequent images proved deeply frustrating. Federal laboratories ultimately determined that the second photo was likely a hoax, while the third was of such low quality that no definitive comparison could ever be made. But the psychological toll on the family was immense. Every new image forced Patty and John Dole to relive the terror of their daughter's disappearance, fluctuating between agonizing hope and horrific despair. What made the original Florida photograph so compelling, however, was not just the girl, but the boy sitting beside her. He appeared to be around 9 years old, his eyes covered with duct tape, his mouth similarly sealed. For months, investigators operated on the assumption that if they could identify the boy, they could solve the mystery of the girl. And initial evidence pointed toward a terrifying possibility. The boy was 9-year-old Michael Henley, who had vanished from the Zuni Mountains in New Mexico in April 1988, just 5 months before Tara disappeared. The dual kidnapping theory gained massive traction in the media. 2 children missing from New Mexico, both appearing in a photograph found in Florida, suggested the work of an organized, highly mobile predator operating along interstate corridors. The FBI pooled resources, cross-referencing transit records, truck stop sightings, and registered sex offenders traveling between the Southwest and the Gulf Coast. Then, in 1990, the entire multi-state theory unraveled in an instant. Hunters walking through the dense timber of the Zuni Mountains, just 7 miles from where Michael Henley had originally gone missing, stumbled upon human remains. Forensic identification confirmed the unthinkable. It was Michael Henley. A thorough medical examination revealed no signs of trauma, foul play, or prolonged captivity. The official cause of death was exposure. The 9-year-old had not been taken by a predator in a white cargo van. He had simply wandered off into the rugged terrain and succumbed to the elements shortly after disappearing. The discovery of Michael Henley's body sent shockwaves through the investigation. It completely severed the link between his case and Tara's, and it struck a devastating blow to the validity of the Florida Polaroid. If the boy in the picture was not Michael Henley, then who was he? And if the boy was an unidentified victim of a totally separate event, what were the statistical odds that the girl beside him was, by mere chance, Tara Calico? Investigators were forced to recalibrate. The grand national search was suddenly called into question, forcing local law enforcement to look back at where it all began: the dirt shoulders and desolate stretches of State Road 47 in Belen, New Mexico. When detectives revisited the initial timeline of September 20, 1988, they began to dissect the small, localized details that had been overshadowed by the national media frenzy. On the morning she disappeared, Tara had left her home at approximately 9:30 a.m. riding her mother's neon pink bicycle. She was set to play tennis with her boyfriend later that afternoon and had told her mother to come get her if she wasn't home by noon, as she had a class at the University of New Mexico's Valencia campus. She never made it back, but multiple witnesses had seen her along her routine route. Several motorists reported seeing a young woman matching Tara's description riding north along the shoulder of the highway. Crucially, more than one witness recalled seeing a late-model Ford pickup truck, light-colored, equipped with a camper shell, following closely behind her. Some witnesses noted that the truck seemed to be trailing her deliberately, slowing down whenever she slowed down, keeping a low profile just off her back wheel. Not far from where those sightings occurred, investigators had previously recovered fragments of Tara's Sony Walkman cassette player, along with pieces of a cassette tape. The physical state of the cassette player offered a grim clue. It hadn't merely been dropped, it appeared to have been shattered, as if dropped during a struggle or intentionally smashed underfoot. Patty Dole believed her daughter had been dropping the pieces deliberately along the road, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for anyone searching for her. The search for Tara immediately focused on the rural corridor of State Road 47, where she took her routine morning bicycle rides. She had left her home in Belen around 9:30 that morning, riding her mother's pink 10-speed bicycle. She was supposed to meet her boyfriend for tennis at noon. When she did not return, Patty Dole drove out looking for her, traveling the exact route twice. She found no sign of her daughter, but witnesses who had been driving along the same stretch of road soon came forward with alarming accounts. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a young woman matching Tara's description being followed by a light blue or beige sedan, possibly a Ford or Chevrolet, but the accounts varied in terms of the exact make and model. One witness even claimed to have seen the sedan driving erratically, swerving on the road as if trying to intimidate or distract the bicyclist. But that wasn't the strangest part. As investigators began to canvass the area, they discovered that several residents had reported seeing a similar sedan parked along the road in the days leading up to Tara's disappearance, fueling speculation that the perpetrator may have been stalking her. The investigation into Tara's disappearance was led by the Belen Police Department, with assistance from the Valencia County Sheriff's Office and the New Mexico State Police. As they began to interview witnesses and gather evidence, they discovered that Tara had been receiving strange phone calls in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The calls were reportedly from an unknown male who would hang up or breathe heavily into the phone without speaking. Tara had brushed off the calls as a prank, but in light of her disappearance, they took on a more ominous tone. But what did these phone calls really mean, and were they truly connected to her disappearance? As the search for Tara continued, investigators found her bicycle abandoned on the side of the road, with no signs of struggle or foul play. The bike was still in good condition, with no visible damage, suggesting that Tara may have simply gotten off and walked away. But why would she do that, and where could she have gone? The area was rural, with few houses or buildings nearby, and no one reported seeing her on foot. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The lack of evidence at the scene made it difficult for investigators to determine what had happened to Tara, and they were left with more questions than answers. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case was the discovery of a Polaroid photo found in a parking lot in Florida, over 1,000 miles from where Tara disappeared. The photo showed a young woman, bound and gagged, who bore a striking resemblance to Tara. The photo was dated June 1989, nearly a year after Tara's disappearance, and it sparked a flurry of activity among investigators. But was the photo really of Tara, or was it a cruel hoax? The woman in the photo was not definitively identified as Tara, and some experts questioned the authenticity of the image. The photo remains one of the most baffling and disturbing aspects of the case, and its significance continues to be debated to this day. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they began to explore the possibility that Tara's disappearance was not an isolated incident. There were reports of similar disappearances in the area, and some speculated that a serial killer may have been at work. But the evidence was circumstantial, and no concrete links were ever established. Theories abounded, from a random abduction to a carefully planned kidnapping, but nothing seemed to fit the facts. The case was a puzzle, with too many missing pieces to form a clear picture. And yet, despite the lack of progress, the investigation continued, driven by the determination of Tara's family and the community to uncover the truth. The years that followed Tara's disappearance were marked by a series of false leads and disappointing dead ends. Tips poured in from across the country, but none of them panned out. The police followed up on every lead, no matter how small, but each one ended in disappointment. The case was a constant reminder that, despite the best efforts of investigators, some mysteries may never be solved. But that didn't stop the search for Tara, and her family continued to hold out hope that she would one day be found. The case remained a source of fascination and frustration, a reminder of the complexities and uncertainties of human nature. In the midst of the investigation, a new lead emerged, one that would take investigators down a surprising path. A woman came forward, claiming to have seen Tara at a gas station in the area several days after her disappearance. The woman reported that Tara was with a man who was acting suspiciously and seemed to be trying to intimidate her. But when investigators followed up on the lead, they discovered that the woman's story was not entirely credible. She had a history of making false reports, and her account of the encounter was riddled with inconsistencies. The lead was ultimately discredited, but it highlighted the challenges investigators faced in separating fact from fiction. As the case dragged on, the community began to rally around Tara's family, offering support and assistance in any way they could. The local media covered the story extensively, keeping the public informed and engaged. The case became a rallying cry, with many calling for increased awareness and action to prevent similar disappearances in the future. But despite the outpouring of support, the investigation continued to stall, and the family was left to wait and wonder. The uncertainty was agonizing, and the lack of progress was frustrating, but the family refused to give up hope. In the years that followed, the case would experience a series of twists and turns, each one raising new questions and sparking fresh speculation. Theories would emerge and fade as new evidence came to light and old leads were re-examined. The case would become a legendary mystery, one that would captivate the public imagination and inspire countless theories and speculations. But at its core, the case remained a simple, yet devastating, tragedy. A young woman full of life and promise had vanished, leaving behind only questions and uncertainty. And as the years went by, the search for Tara would continue. Driven by the determination to uncover the truth, no matter how elusive it may seem. The investigation into Tara's disappearance would go on to become one of the most extensive and complex in New Mexico's history, involving multiple agencies and generating thousands of leads. But despite the efforts of investigators, the case would remain a source of frustration and heartache, a reminder that some mysteries may never be fully solved. The case would raise questions about the nature of justice and the limits of human knowledge, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and unfulfilled hopes. And yet, even in the face of uncertainty, the search for Tara would continue, a testament to the power of hope and the human spirit. As the years turned into decades, the case would experience a series of revivals as new evidence emerged and old leads were re-examined. The advent of new technologies, such as DNA analysis and digital forensics, would offer fresh possibilities for solving the case. But each new development would also raise new questions, and the case would continue to evolve, like a puzzle with constantly shifting pieces. The search for Tara would become a metaphor for the search for truth itself, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is often a journey without end, and that the truth may be more complex and nuanced than we ever imagined. In the end, the disappearance of Tara Calico would remain a haunting enigma, a reminder of the fragility of human life and the unpredictability of fate. The case would continue to fascinate and frustrate, a source of endless speculation and debate. But for those who knew Tara, the case would always be about more than just a mystery or a puzzle to be solved. It would be about a young woman, full of life and promise, who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a family and a community that would never forget her. The search for Tara would continue, a testament to the power of love and the human spirit, and a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, hope can endure. While hope remained the emotional anchor for those who loved Tara Calico, the cold reality confronting investigators in the autumn of 1988 was built on a frustrating lack of physical evidence. State Road 47, a sun-baked ribbon of asphalt stretching through Valencia County, held few immediate answers. Tara had vanished on a routine 30-mile bicycle ride, leaving behind a timeline that narrowed her disappearance down to a window of mere minutes. But when deputies retraced her route, they didn't find a crime scene in the traditional sense. There were no skid marks indicating a violent collision, no signs of a prolonged struggle in the dirt, and no abandoned bicycle laying in the brush. Instead, the first tangible clues were minute, scattered, and deeply perplexing. Along the shoulder of the highway, searchers discovered pieces of a broken Sony Walkman and a cassette tape containing music by the band Boston. Tara's mother, Patty Dole, positively identified these items as belonging to her daughter. To investigators, the distribution of these fragments suggested two troubling possibilities. Either Tara had dropped them deliberately in a desperate effort to leave a trail, or they had been discarded from the window of a moving vehicle as it sped away from the scene. But that wasn't the strangest part. Just feet away from where the electronic fragments were recovered, investigators observed distinct tire tracks pressed into the soft dirt along the shoulder. The impressions indicated that a vehicle had pulled off the pavement and driven parallel to the road at high speed before swerving back onto the asphalt. Witnesses soon came forward claiming to have seen a light-colored pickup truck, possibly a late 1970s Ford or Chevrolet, following closely behind a female cyclist on State Road 47 around the time Tara vanished. Yet, despite canvassing hundreds of residents, inspecting scores of matching trucks across the county, and following up on every lead, the vehicle and its driver seemed to vanish into the New Mexico dust. As weeks stretched into months, the physical evidence cold-lined, and the local investigation stalled under the weight of conflicting tips and dead ends. The search for a localized suspect in Valencia County was suddenly disrupted 9 months later by a discovery thousands of miles away. A discovery that would fundamentally alter the public perception of the case and launch one of the most agonizing forensic debates in modern true crime history. On June 15, 1989, in the coastal town of Port St. Joe, Florida, a woman pulling out of a convenience store parking lot noticed a piece of paper lying face down on the pavement. When she flipped it over, she was confronted with an image that was instantly disturbing. It was a glossy Polaroid photograph depicting a young woman and a younger boy, both gagged with thick black duct tape and their arms bound tightly behind their backs. They were positioned on a pile of striped pillows inside what appeared to be the windowless cargo area of a van, illuminated only by the harsh flash of the camera. The woman immediately handed the photograph over to local police, who noted that the vehicle parked in the space where the photo was found was a white cargo van driven by a man in his 30s. By the time law enforcement realized the potential severity of the image, the van had departed. But as news of the photograph circulated nationally through television broadcasts, it caught the attention of Patty Dole. When Tara's mother looked at the face of the young woman in the Polaroid, she became convinced she was looking at her daughter. Patty pointed to several specific physical markers that seemed too precise to be coincidental. The girl in the photo bore a visible scar on her calf, located in the exact position where Tara had acquired a mark following a serious car accident years earlier. Furthermore, resting on the cushion beside the girl in the photograph was a paperback copy of the novel My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews, a book that Patty confirmed was one of Tara's absolute favorites. The emotional weight of these details created an immediate, powerful narrative that swept through the national media. Tara Calico had been kidnapped and was being held captive in the back of a cargo van. The image of the young woman, her hands bound behind her back with thick dark tape, her mouth sealed, staring directly into the camera lens with wide, terrified eyes, ignited an international media sensation. Alongside her was a young boy, similarly bound and gagged. The photograph had been found on July 15, 1989, in the parking lot of a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida. A woman had picked up the Polaroid after noticing it lying on the pavement where